Randy Goers, welcome to the TBD Pod.
Thanks, Pete.
I appreciate you being here. You're a former City of Tampa planning director. You've also done some other stuff in your professional career, but you've been an urban planner, over 35 years experience, long range, strategic community planning. You've served under 5 Tampa mayors. You played a pivotal role in shaping the city's growth and development until your retirement a few years ago, late 2021. Played a pivotal role, several key urban development initiatives, West River redevelopment, 150-acre development on the west side of the river. That's related, correct? All that stuff happening there now. The Main Street, Old West Tampa revitalization. You led the efforts to reimagine the historic Main Street there in West Tampa. Sea level rise planning, too. Under your leadership, the city planning department initiated studies to understand and mitigate the impacts of sea level rise in Tampa, which is a huge topic, obviously, right now on the backside of those really 4 major hurricanes this season. Anything else I'm missing?
Did a lot of work with downtown planning.
A lot in between, probably, I'm missing, which we'll talk about today. But thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. You also have a podcast. I don't know if we'll leave in that first part, but what's the name of your podcast so people can look it up?
I do a podcast called The Drone Radio Show. It's about drones and the people that use them for business, fun, and research.
And probably discuss some military applications too.
A little bit, not a whole lot. Most of it's on commercial, just because the military is a little controversial.
Right.
But I do get a few military companies that have a technology which they're ready to bring to the commercial market.
Well, they can. I'm sure that technology can be applied in both scenarios effectively. The military application, it seems like a lot of people are against it. You'll see comments online with some of those horrific videos about how, this should be outlawed. This should be against, human civility when it comes to wartime scenarios and stuff like that. But I don't know where I stand. I think they can be an effective tool if it's for surveillance. But when you start talking about putting C4 explosives and drones and hunting people down through artificial intelligence, facial recognition, that conversation, it gets a little tricky there.
Yeah.
So I understand why you might want to avoid it. But yeah, people, check out Randy's drone radio show. Super cool. And you said you've been doing it for like a decade, right?
Yeah, almost 10 years. Just finished my 433rd interview yesterday.
That's amazing. And how did you go from all of this talk about planning in the city of Tampa to drones?
I was actually interested in doing a podcast at the time. And 10 years ago, there was a small group of podcasters here in Tampa that were getting together at local meetups, sharing their experience and how they got started. So I went to one of their meetups and started discussing an interest in podcasting. And then the next question, every time I asked about or told them I had an interest in podcasting, they'd say, well, what's your podcast going to be about? And I had 3 ideas. One of them was going to be planning related, but I felt it would be a little bit of a conflict of interest if I was talking about things I was working on. The second was travel, and a lot of them just shook their heads and said everybody's doing a travel podcast. And then I kind of said, well, I had this interest in drones, and everyone at the group said you should do that. And I said, I have no idea anything about the drones industry or drones. And I said, well, doing a podcast is a great way to learn. So
that's exactly right.
That's how I jumped into it. I started doing the podcast, contacting people in the industry, and started interviewing them, and it's grown since.
And you almost have 450 episodes out there.
Yep.
What did you say, 433?
433.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, check that out, people. That's cool. I certainly will check it out. I think it's a fascinating technology, and there's a hell of a lot to talk about right now with everything going on. And also transportation. The air taxis at the Tampa airport, they've unveiled through that German company.
Yeah.
So drones are getting ready to affect, plus deliveries, Amazon. It's like, well, I think Walmart is now delivering through drones, right?
Walmart's been doing it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I've interviewed most of the companies in the drone delivery space, and they all have different business models. And one of the most interesting one is the company, right? The name escapes me. It'll pop up as I'm talking, but their model is to create ghost kitchens in cities. So they'll go to an industrial area, find a big building, and start putting kitchens in it. And these might be name brand kitchens, some sort of pizza, coffee, Starbucks, something like that. but they only serve the deliveries. People can't go into the kitchen and buy anything. And the drones will deliver right from those kitchens to that warehouse to the surrounding community. And they said their biggest delivery is a cup of coffee. That's their highest rated delivery. And they said they can get a cup of coffee to a consumer within 2 minutes, still hot. And they said it still has the little curly thing at the top with the foam, undisturbed.
Now that's incredible.
So they just started they were from Ireland, and now they're have a service in Dallas.
Interesting.
And then the Walmart, within a 5-mile radius of Walmart, there's something like 10,000 households generally. So they figured that in the suburban area is where people just, that decision when they need to go get something is like, it's too much time during the rush hour for me to go buy something that I need for dinner or whatever. So the suburban locations of Walmarts are starting to find that people will use a drone to have something delivered that they need for dinner or something like that really quick.
So groceries are waiting for you when you get home.
Yeah. Or you're in the middle of cooking, you need something, it shows up within 5 minutes, 10 minutes of you making the order.
So you don't need to go to your neighbor for a cup of sugar anymore. You just have a drone come drop it off.
Yeah.
Wow. It's going to create so many questions about society and in what circumstances in 10, 20, 50 years are we even going to have to interact with each other?
Yeah.
And if I don't need to go next door to borrow something ever, I press a button and a drone drops it off. I'm in my car isolated or whatever, my autonomous vehicle isolated. It's like there's a lot of disconnection. I think conversations that are going to occur with all this new technology.
And the technology is getting to where it's for the user, they won't even know. All they're going to do is open up an app, say, I need a head of lettuce. And for them, they don't care if it's coming from Uber Eats, Uber Air,
right?
Neighbor dropping it off. They just need a head of lettuce, but it's going to show up at their doorstep. And sometimes it'll be a land vehicle, and sometimes it'll be a drone that'll drop it off. But that's where people in the future are going to be going, is that they don't really care how it gets there as long as it gets there and they can pay for it at a competitive price.
What do you think the realistic application timeline of that is? I mean, do you think in 5 years that's not fully built out, but a regular part of our society?
I think it's going to be less for the deliveries because it's already happening. It's just that in the suburban areas, we'll see it growing quite fast, because that's where people will see the real value in terms of getting the product quickly without having to leave. Urban areas just become a little bit more complex because of all the buildings and flying over people and all that kind of stuff.
Here's an article from 2021. Alphabet, which is Google, right? I would assume. Mm-hmm. Drones delivered 10,000 cups of coffee and 1,200 roast chickens in the last year. That was from August 2021. I'm sure their numbers have gone way crazier than that. On-demand drone delivery service in Virginia. Yeah, this is like very, very quickly becoming a regular part of society. I think even in Tampa, maybe it was Riverview or Brandon, somewhere in the Tampa Bay area, I saw an article about this practice being implemented. I think it was Walmart.
Yep.
Yeah, super exciting. But you didn't come here today to talk about drones. So I want to talk about, let's start off with, where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got interested in urban planning. You have a long, long career in urban planning. 35 years, was that accurate?
Yeah, I actually had a few years before that, but 35 years with the city of Tampa.
35 years at the city of Tampa.
Yeah.
So where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? How'd you get interested in this field?
I grew up in Michigan, just north of Ann Arbor, west of Detroit, in a rural area, and went to Michigan State. I went to Michigan State really, and my first major was in astrophysics, believe it or not. Wow. I grew up as my biggest hobby was astronomy, and so I really thought I was going to move into something in that area. So I jumped into astrophysics. I really loved the astronomy part. The physics part of it was pretty hard. So like a lot of people in the engineering field, I sort of washed out or I got bored. And then plus I looked in the newspaper and said, what do I do with an astrophysics degree? And I got the first realization was you can't do anything in 4 years. You got to really spend 8 years. And I said, I don't really have enough time that get a PhD. So I began looking for other majors. And so I migrated to city planning. There was one interesting story. It still sort of haunts me today. I remember like on a Friday morning, just waking up and getting a phone call. And it was from the computer center at Michigan State. And there was one of the teaching assistants there. It said, "We noticed you've taken 2 or 3 computer science courses. You did really well." This is back when to write a program, you had to use the index cards. And there might be 600 or 700 600 index cards in a program that you had to feed into the reader. And if it didn't work, you had to go back and find out what card was the one that screwed up your program. So anyways, he said, you had 3 classes, you did really well. We'd like to know if you'd like to be a teaching assistant. And he said it pays $12 an hour, which was a lot of money back in 1976. So I sat there and I thought, and I go, well, what do you do with a computer science degree? I'm thinking. And all I could come up with was IBM and Honeywell, the guys that walked into the big offices with the thin ties and the pen holders. And I couldn't think of anything else you could do with a computer science degree. And I said, "Yeah, it's not for me." And 2 years later, all of the computer science majors, that's when Apple Computer hit the market. And all the computer science graduates were being flown out to California with these high-paying jobs. So anyways, I needed to find a major. And I just sort of started looking at urban planning and sort of passed when I was thumbing through all the different career options. And really began to gravitate towards the creativity part of it. There was a methodology to sort of satisfy my science background and so forth.
And in the late 70s, what did urban planning look like, right? This is the kind of on the outside of urban renewal, right? Highways had just gotten built in the last decade at that time, the last 5 years or so. Can you look up, David, when was Interstate 75 constructed? Because my parents say, oh, when I was a kid, there was no interstate, right? So maybe around this time is when the interstate got constructed.
I think the interstate was well, I'm not sure what it was in Florida.
57 was Interstate 75. Type in Florida, because obviously this is through different phases. But yeah, what was the environment like studying urban planning in the late 70s?
I mean, studying it was great. I mean, the theory behind urban planning and the idea of looking at cities and what do cities need to function and how do you make them livable and all that stuff was really interesting. That's what really got me to it. In Michigan at the time, planning was a very tough profession because things moved really, really slow in Michigan.
Yeah.
You could work on a plan for years and years and years and not see anything happen. So there was a little bit of frustration in Michigan, and the jobs market really wasn't that strong. But I graduated, had a couple of small jobs, basically was hiring myself out as an independent planner because agencies just weren't taking people on full time. But it gave me an opportunity to sort of hone a skill of developing a work plan, promising a product, delivering it, and getting it done at a young age.
So this is early 80s by the time you're getting into your professional career.
Yeah. I graduated in 79, so it was a early part of the 80s in Michigan. So planning was up and down in Michigan, and I'd gotten out of the field for a while and just was sort of looking around at other types of options. Nothing really opened up. But in 86, I needed to really focus on some things. I had a number of things that just weren't going well in Michigan, and I needed to make a new start. And some friends were in the planning industry told me that Florida just passed a new law, state law, requiring every community to do comprehensive plans, and that was one of my strengths. And they just said, with your skills, you ought to go down there. You probably find a job fairly quickly. And that's what happened. I just made some phone calls, got some interviews, came down, interviewed with the city of Tampa, and was offered a position within the first 24 hours after interviewing.
Wow. So what year did you first accept a position in the city of
That
Tampa?
was 1986, October of 1986.
1986, and got the job pretty quick. So at that time, it sounds like there was just more supply than there was demand for planners. It sounds like there was a ton of work to be done
There was like I said, every community had to submit a comprehensive plan to
by
the state.
state law.
And there was a huge need for planners, and the Southeast, I think, just didn't have enough planning schools or planners in the area to really provide it, because my skills seemed to fit pretty well with what the city was looking for.
And at that time, because this is mandated by state law, was there a few year period of kind of what are we doing, right? If it was not state law before, did a lot of municipalities and cities and counties not have a comprehensive plan at that time?
They had comprehensive plans, but they didn't. The state required was a much thorough process and much more consistent. Everybody had to follow the same outline for their plan, had the same requirements, and there was a much more stronger emphasis on implementation and sanctions if you didn't. You had to have your plan had to have established levels of service. You had to show how you were going to meet your levels of service. You had to have regulations that implemented your policies, and you had that was the first time we heard the word concurrency, where facilities had to be put in place or planned before, to make sure that you could accommodate the growth in your plan. So all of those things were new. But even though I came in with my skills as comprehensive planning, I was primarily hired in the urban design section to do the downtown plan. That was an opportunity for Mayor Friedman at that time, under the requirements of the Growth Management Act, to look at the downtown, because downtown at that time didn't have a land use designation, believe it or not. It just had this sort of general hole in the land use plan. It might have said CBD or something, but there really wasn't anything written about it. It had a couple of zoning districts, and almost half of the plan, or almost half of the CBD or more, was zoned industrial. So there really wasn't a guide for the central business district. So I was brought in as one of three people on a team to create the downtown plan at the time, and with a focus on urban design.
And when you were hired at the city of Tampa, what was the position? What were you in charge of that planning department?
No, I was hired as an urban planner too. There was an urban design manager. There was myself, and then there was a graphics designer that was assigned to us. So the three of us were the ones that pulled together. I was probably the planning expert. My urban design manager, he had a really strong background in landscape and architecture, so he did all the conceptual drawings and illustrations and really worked through how the review process would work because of his experience. But my strength was really looking at the area, pulling together all of the information, and putting together the plan. And
David, I was just going to say, David, can you pull up a picture? Just type in like downtown Tampa, late 80s. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
And what sort of helped propel that effort, Mayor Friedman appointed a 10-member task force of high community leaders. These were people that did business downtown. At the time, General Electric had GE had their headquarters downtown. So it was the CEO of GE, that was the CEO of TCO, some real estate professionals. Yule Culverhouse, his attorney, Reese Smith, from one of the major law firms. So she had a very high powered, high visibility 10-member group that helped funnel all the recommendations down into a final plan.
Scroll up, David. So go to, what's a good example here? Probably right there where it says X on the right. Yeah, that's a good shot because you've got that PNC building, which was built in the late 80s. So at that time, right, late 80s was kind of like the office tower era, right? A lot of these downtown skyscrapers we have now were built in the late 80s. So when you get to Tampa, and you get your position and you get put on the task force for downtown. There's a team, right? And like you said, there's really there's no cohesive plan. There's really not even a zoning district for downtown at that time. When you get to Tampa and you see some of these office towers going up and you see the palm trees, right? You're from Michigan. Like, what is going through your head as a young man who is probably in a really, really high growth rate city at the time in Florida? Did you have a sense of ambition for the city? What was kind of the rhetoric for downtown Tampa at that time?
It was, I really enjoyed it. I thought, there was a lot of opportunity for downtown. And in fact, I remember just sitting down, just drawing up a lot of concepts when I first arrived, just playing around and bouncing them off some of the other staff that was there. But at the same time, it was, at that time, planning in the city was, and decisions were it was really very Tampa, very small town Tampa.
Yeah.
There were key people that were going to be involved in making big decisions. And so you really had to sort of for me, I had to really understand the lay of the land a little bit and make sure I wasn't going to step on anybody's toes.
It was an old guard, right?
Yeah.
There.
But there was there were a lot of developers from Dallas, Houston that came in. Their companies had come in and built some of the new office towers. And so there was this emphasis where they really felt that they were going to make some major changes in the downtown. And it sort of conflicted with some of the older guard that was like, well, we don't want to maybe go in that direction. But the big thing, our biggest challenge was we wanted to encourage development, but we wanted to have quality development, excuse me, and really with a big emphasis on the pedestrian environment.
And at the time, how was that done? It was through a plan, through guidelines developers had to follow, streetscape stuff. And do you feel like, looking back over your career on those early days, do you feel like the plan was set up successfully? Certainly, right? You look downtown Tampa today and you go, well, yeah, super successful. But there's many, many years in between.
There's a couple of things from the plan. There were a few things that were changed because of the economics change. The central core of downtown, which an area that was maybe about 2 blocks on each side of Franklin Street, from North Franklin down to One Tampa City Center. That area was where we really were trying to focus all the new high-rise development. And so the goal was to try to make that as easy as possible for developers. So the code really didn't have a whole lot of requirements for development. And you have to remember, back then, there wasn't really a demand for high-rise development in anywhere of Tampa except in downtown. West Shore had demand, but it wasn't high-rise. So we really wanted to push high-rise development along Franklin to make it easier. So outside of the Franklin Street area, there were some extra requirements. You had to put in some public art. You had to put in some landscaping to sort of soften the impact, and some open space requirements. Those sort of went away as the economics in downtown, we started getting into some recessions, and it looked like it was going to be a difficult time for developers to meet some of those requirements. But the one that really hung in there was the requirement for the Riverwalk. That was the ordinance that said if you're going to develop along the waterfront, you had to reserve a 20-foot easement for a Riverwalk, and then you had to build it according to the city standards. So had that not been in place, or had it been changed later on, we would have not had the Riverwalk as the way it is today. Developers could have developed their building right up the water and cut it off.
So the inception of the plan of the Riverwalk was late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And it was only 25 years later that it got built.
Yeah. Wow. Which is still pretty amazing when you think about how much of it actually had to get built and conceptualized with going over the water and trying to integrate within the existing development.
It shows you too how important planning is, and to have those pieces in place decades in advance.
Yeah.
Because good luck today, right? If none of that had been written, you probably would have had frontage on the river, private property, restaurant, whatever, office, amenity, and it would have been really difficult
Yeah,
to get a Riverwalk through there.
especially if somebody would have chose the option to develop it right up and keep it private.
Right. Very interesting. So I want to talk about that era too, because you mentioned getting into a recession. You're talking like, was there a recession early 90s?
Yeah.
So in the late 80s, I think, because I was born in 92, right? I don't know, I see like the movie Wall Street, and there's all these depictions of 80s, and there was an economic boom in the late 80s, correct?
Mm-hmm.
At that time. And you have these office towers going up and things are really cranking. Tell me about the energy real quick of downtown. Obviously when I was growing up in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, downtown was dead, right? After 5 o'clock, and really nothing was going on. There wasn't that many, if any, people living downtown. I think Element and Sky Point in the mid 2000s is when we got some good residents coming in. But before that, it was just kind of a suitcase city. What was it like in the late 80s?
It was quiet. I mean, really quiet. You didn't have, the only people that lived in the central business district were the residents at which was called One Laurel Place. I'm not sure if it's still called that now. It's right at the.
It is, yeah.
There was a couple hundred people maybe that were starting to live there. I know Mayor Buckhorn jokes because he said that when he started working, the only people who lived downtown were the people that were in the county jail, which was true. I mean, when you looked at the population that was stated in the census, it would say 400 people, but everybody knew that was the population of the jail. There wasn't anybody living downtown. Harbor Island had just finished their marketplace, and the one condo that is connected to the marketplace. And they were just starting construction on the single-family home. So that's all that there was. And the emphasis of planning then was really revolved around that, because the idea was nobody's living downtown, nobody's coming downtown, so we need to make it easy for people to get in and get out. And so there was a real strong emphasis on making sure people can get out of town fast and stick around.
Parking and traffic flow efficiency was probably at the top of the list. But, you mentioned you wanted to promote high-rise development on Franklin and that kind of central business district area of downtown, north of kind of the crosstown there. Was there an emphasis on residential towers?
No, not at that time. There wasn't any. I think some of the discussions that came out of the mayor's advisory committee at that time was there was this belief that until Harbor Island developed, that developers were not going to risk in downtown, because the land could be the land costs at Harbor Island at the time were going to be comparable or less, and the risk was less. So as long as people were able to go to buy a house or rent on Harbor Island, you weren't going to find a developer that was going to risk in the central business district. And that kind of followed through, because it wasn't until the early 2000s, after Harbor Island was pretty well flushed out, that we started to see people, developers at least. We saw people had an interest in living downtown. The Channel District individuals were trying to come into some of the industrial places. So there was an interest. It just took a while.
That's where we lived. 2002, 2003, 2004, and 2005, we were on Harbor Island. And at that time, it was incredible. I mean, you felt like you were in a gated community in what felt like a beautifully manicured and was a suburban style development, but then you're over a bridge from downtown. And of course, this is minus every residents. You only have the people in the county jail living downtown, right. So you could hop over the bridge and be right there immediately. It was that era of Harbor Island was incredible. Now a lot of those residents are angry because maybe when they moved in it was like that, but now certainly downtown has a lot more life and a lot more people. So there's this kind of rub against that whole thing going on.
Yeah, we had to help try and create some activity downtown. The Tampa Downtown Partnership at that time was fairly new. But they created a subcommittee that was called the Downtown Core, and it was basically a group of young professionals. I joined it, and I ended up becoming the president in the third year of the organization. But the goal of that organization was to promote special events downtown. But our idea was that we've got to show people what's going on downtown.
Yeah.
So we would do monthly membership meetings and then have a monthly fundraiser for a local charity. But the idea was that we've got to bring people downtown so they can get used to it, realize that it's not a scary place.
Yeah.
And so we would support new restaurants that they opened up. We would do a couple events there to try to bring people in.
But what about living there at that time?
At that time, no. It was basically, the goal was basically show that downtown could be fun.
Was that an American cultural thing? I mean, wouldn't it be an obvious choice to put some residents downtown to support the restaurants and the other businesses? I mean, why was residential in downtown it sounds like not even really thought of as feasible for your first at least 5 years here?
Yeah, and longer. I mean, it was part of it was just a national trend of people, the suburbanization, people wanting to get out to get their own home in a cheaper area, have more space. The other part, I think, is that when you look back historically, Tampa didn't have a whole lot of residential living, at least that I could find, in the central business district. It seemed like it was a business-oriented CBD, small, compact. A lot of the buildings that had come down looked like they were businesses, not necessarily residential. So it didn't have a real history of people living in those areas, at least in high degrees. And it just took a while for people to catch on to downtown, just like in other cities. It took a while for people that whole urban center redevelopment, rediscovery to take hold.
Yeah, it did take a long time. And even moving into kind of the mid 2000s into the 07, 08, you had the recession and that really put a halt on all of the residents that were planned. I mean, Trump Tower was supposed to be residential. There was a few other condo projects, and then the recession happened. And then really, I'm trying to think, 2010, 11, 12, again, not a whole lot of new action going on during that time. And now obviously it's blown up. I want to bring it back to Harbor Island though, because you said that was a pivotal shift in having residents downtown and maybe the way people thought of downtown. Can you pull up Harbor Island development 1980s, David? In fact, even better, type in Harbor Island People Mover. I want to ask you about the People Mover. Because to me, this is such, today there's this huge conversation about transportation, right? And solving our transportation issues through means that don't include an automobile or adding more lanes to an interstate highway. We had this interesting People Mover, which was I believe it was a wheeled vehicle on a track that was elevated from Harbor Island into downtown. Talk to me about that, because I would assume at the time that was kind of an exciting thing to have here in Tampa. Maybe go to Wikipedia too, so we can see some of the facts and what year this was built, 85 to 99. So right around the time you've started here and working in Tampa.
Yeah, I remember before I moved to Tampa, reading about the People Mover in an article when I was living in Michigan, and it sounded really cool, and it was cool. It was nice to be able to go to the Fort Brooke garage. That's where the station was, and get on and go over to Harbor Island for lunch, or go there for maybe the bars or restaurants after work, and it seemed to serve a strong purpose. My understanding, my recollection from back then, it was just a maintenance issue that ended up creating the controversy, because Beneficial paid for the maintenance for a certain period. I don't know how long.
Yeah.
But after that, then somebody had to pick it up, and it was a pretty high expense at a time when the recession, the 2000 recession, was starting to come in. And then I also think there was a problem with its when they were talking about building the walkway across from the convention center to the Embassy Suites. There was a problem with the way the track was oriented, that they couldn't have both. They couldn't have the track and that walkway. And the hotels really felt they needed to be connected with the walkway rather than having people walk across the street.
So it says here the Harbor Island People Mover was an automated guideway transit people mover service in Tampa, built in 1985. It says that, where was I just hooked up to? It marked the return of rail transit to Tampa since the closure of the streetcar network in 1946. $7 million to complete. Former President Gerald Ford took part in the inaugural ride. Very interesting. Ridership remained relatively low, like you kind of said. 1989, ridership averaged 1,200 riders on a weekday, 1,500 on the weekend. Then you had the shuttle bus service coming in, which probably took away from those riders. It also says that the money given to the city for the closure of the system in a settlement with the ownership served as the foundation of an endowment to cover the operating expenses of the Tico line streetcar. Interesting. Fast forward to today, this is kind of an interesting idea to come back. I mean, we have so many more people living downtown. It's just a different world. Do you think something like that would be popular today?
It probably could at some degree. You know, the hard part about transit systems, especially when you're in the fixed systems, is really trying to anticipate the number of people that are going to be using it today versus 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Are they still going to go back and forth and still grow? And
look at this thing, man.
I mean, that's
how cool.
At that time, it was. I think it was popular because tourists would come in and you would take it for the first time to get over. But in terms
and then you
of
go, okay, we're done here.
Yeah, and there may have been a few downtown or Harbor Island residents at the time. There weren't very many that would take it if they were working in the downtown and coming back. But after a while, there wasn't much of a reason to go back and forth to Harbor Island unless you wanted something to eat and or if you were there coming into downtown.
So Real Tampa has actually posted some videos of downtown from the late 1980s. Can you pull up on Instagram at Real Tampa and pull up some of those videos that he just put out? Because he's got these amazing videos of the late 80s in downtown Tampa. And you've got these new office towers going up. You've got the People Mover, the new Harbor Island development. It seems like at that time there was a decent amount of momentum here that wasn't seen until at least 20 years later, right before the recession in the mid 2000s. It seems like there was kind of this really good momentum in our urban core, and it fell flat for a couple decades. And I think maybe that's what I'm remembering as a kid going to downtown, this kind of blighted office worker area that didn't have life outside of that.
Yeah, there was a surge of private.
Yeah, here you go. Here's a video of riding the People Mover in the 1980s.
Yeah, that's
Look at that. Sorry to cut you off.
There was a surge of private investment in the early 80s, and but by the time the late 80s and early 90s came in, the private side really kind of dried up, and the investment that was taking shape after that was really from the public sector. You had the Seaport Terminal that was starting to move forward from the port, so that was an investment. The Florida Aquarium that came in 95, again, another public investment, and then the arena that came in a few years later. So those types of developments were the big drivers, but it became really the public side that was taking the initiative to begin redeveloping or adding to the fabric.
People are commenting on this video of downtown in the 80s with this People Mover line. People are saying, how the hell did we lose this? People Mover was great. Imagine how much easier it would be to avoid traffic if we kept this. The rhetoric around public transportation through rail, right, is such a popular topic now. So, and we're jumping ahead a little bit, but there's so much public will for something like this. From a planner's perspective, right? I think when you first started, it was all about, and you even said this, getting people in and out, an emphasis on parking, an emphasis on traffic efficiency, right? Why do you think things have shifted? Why is there so much emphasis on rail? Is it simply just because there's so much traffic today?
I think that's it. I mean, obviously, it would provide another form of mobility, and other large cities which have major traffic problems have good metro systems. And for any of us that travel to cities where there's a good metro system, we always come back talking about what a great system it is, because we depend on it while we're there, and it's so easy for us to use. We're not there with our car driving through and having a decision whether to take it or not, or go somewhere else. So they are great systems. It just always gets back to, can you do it feasibly? What's the feasibility of putting a system in place, and then what's the cost? And then after that are there other options? The other part is a lot of systems in other cities have a bus system, which is usually just as good as their rail system. So when you get off the rail, if you need to take a bus, you don't have any apprehensions about going on it. It gets you where you want to go. It's regular. Here we struggle with our bus system as to exactly who is it serving, the level of service, how much does it cost, all those things. So until we can solve those things, it becomes people are just frozen. My first meeting that I was sent to in 1986 was a meeting over in Pinellas County about the high-speed rail, and the discussion then was, what should be the policy of the area, of the region on high-speed rail, and the same discussion that we have today on where rail is going to go, the cost, where the stations were, they were having that same discussion 40 years ago, and so they've never been able to get to the next level on the rail planning.
Why do you think that is? 40 years. What a ridiculous amount of time. I think about the Riverwalk example and how 30 years ago, 20 years ago, there was a plan for Riverwalk, and that foundation is laid, and decades later, the plan comes to life, and it's something that so many people enjoy. 40 years ago, had those plans been in place, we might have an efficient rail system here in our area. Maybe, right?
Yeah, we probably have a couple lines.
Couple lines, call it. So why do you think that is? Why is it so difficult for this region in regards to transportation?
I think you have a lot of different constituencies. And then it gets back to we haven't been able to put forward a plan that can create the coalescence of all of those constituencies. There's been a lot of concepts, a lot of different alignments, but for some reason it hasn't been presented to a point where people say, yeah, that's what we want. We all agree on it. And then the cost and the funding part of it. It just scares people away.
Yeah.
That it becomes difficult. It got to the point where I would remember at one point joking with people saying, with the amount of money that it was costing, amount of money that we're talking about building a rail system, we could easily just bought up all the land around downtown and put 50,000 people there, and that way they wouldn't have to use rail to get downtown.
So even at that time, the cost conversation was at the forefront.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even in earlier years, people just didn't have it because our roads were not really that congested. Malfunction Junction was always that way, but people could get around Tampa fairly easily. It was really hard to make the argument that congestion was a main problem, that you needed to invest a lot more.
Yeah.
People just really were able to get around downtown or down in Tampa fairly easy.
Boy, if you had a time machine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, traffic is great. We don't need any sort of system like that.
Well, even today, I have people that move in from other cities, and we complain about traffic.
True.
We see it grow, but people from other major urban centers come in and go, it's really not as bad as we think.
Do you think the demand, right, until we are at absolute gridlock, does that conversation become real? Until, if I can hop in my car and have my air conditioning and radio and get to where I need to go efficiently, I don't know that there's an incentive to fund what probably would be a multi-billion-dollar project to get adequate regional rail in this area.
Yeah.
So do you think that a lot of it has to do with that traffic demand? Until things are really bad, it's just probably not going to happen.
That and or if we can come up with a funding strategy which isn't painful. You can have a long range plan. We've shown what can happen with the Riverwalk if you just have a vision, a commitment, and then look for opportunities over a period of time. So if we were able to come up with a plan and a funding which didn't make people angry, and then show progress over time. And once you hit a certain level of construction activity or momentum, then people start jumping on it and start seeing the value in it.
Do you think today, much like the Riverwalk, we should, at the minimum, have plans laid out of where it would go and a potential plan to fund this thing?
Yeah, I think it should be brought out, and at the very least, put out so people can say, I understand what it's going to take. Because right now we're just most people are just reacting to
Right.
their daily drive. People should do this, they should do that, and it's hard to make any kind of progress when you're not talking about specifics. So I think at least having it out there and having somebody say, this is what it would take to get to the type of service that generally people want. This is what it would take. Someone might, a lot of people might just balk at the cost or the feasibility of it, but then you say, okay, here's how we plan to attack the problem, and so we can make it happen over time. But unless people or at least see it laid out and can assess the costs and the requirements, it gets very difficult.
It's just weird to talk about starting a plan when this conversation has been had for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah,
it's exhausting, really. On the new Howard Franklin Bridge, FDOT is building. It's almost $1 billion, $863 million, if I'm not mistaken, probably more. Those things always, go up by the time they're built. They added the infrastructure, the load-bearing capability to one day run light rail on that bridge. That fact, is there hope in there, or is that done? My thought is, well, that's a bigger contract for the contractor to put the extra load in there. You know what I mean? That's a bigger construction bill. So that's an easy sell to a contractor to get that done. But is that real hope?
I think it's a acknowledgement that, that FDOT looked at and said, we see our role here.
Right.
We're not going to be the ones that say you can't
right.
do it.
What
we're doing is we had an opportunity to rebuild. We're going to put it in place. It's up to the community now to figure out if they want to use it. Otherwise, 8 years from now or whatever, if we are able to make a solution, someone says, well, we can't go across the bridge because FDOT didn't consider it. So I think it was good foresight on their part to do that. And, maybe they learned a little bit when the Courtney Campbell was built and the whole thing about putting the pedestrian connection across it. I think they began to see we got to start thinking about the possibilities for the future.
Super popular, by the way. People love that Courtney Campbell corridor, and they're basically doing the same thing on the Howard Franklin. They have these little bump outs with benches and shade areas. You'll have a bike trail along the Howard Franklin. It's really a beautiful project. Very expensive, the most expensive bridge in Florida history, the widest bridge in Florida history. It's a massive project. But how many people lived in Florida in 1980? I mean, you might be talking about 9 million people. Today we have over 23 million people. With that much people and with all these growth metrics, it's necessary to have these massive infrastructure projects. I think it's a great thing. They'll be tearing down the bridge, the original bridge, which was built in the 1950s, and I think keeping the one that was built in the 1990s. I want to ask you if, wave a magic wand scenario, where does rail start? And we talked about a plan, right? Do you do it from the airport to downtown first? Like, realistically, how does that play out from a planning perspective? I mean, you have decades looking at this stuff.
I think you have there's different dimensions of it. I think you need to connect the downtowns, at least St. Pete and Tampa, and whether or not there's stops in between, but those two areas need to be connected, and then maybe out east towards Orlando. So you have and that might be where the high-speed rail connection is. In Tampa, we've always said it needs to be a rail that goes up towards the University of South Florida area, one that goes out to West Shore, and then ideally one that goes down to the Gandy corridor where a lot of the redevelopment that's happening down there. Those three rail lines would allow for most of the residents in Tampa to be able to access and get to a lot of different places.
That makes sense. And then in the urban core, in Tampa's urban core, right? The streetcar was put in I think the early 2000s. Kind of built as a little bit of a novelty, right? With the nod to a historic streetcar. It's kind of cute, they're rickety and fun. This right here is a rendering of a modernized streetcar, which was, I think, kind of at the onset of all for transportation, right? When there was anticipation for funding, is I believe when they put this out. How does the streetcar fit in? Do you see it as a viable transportation solution, at least in the urban core of Tampa?
It could be. I haven't really looked at the stats in a long time to fully understand who's riding it and what their living, working situation is. Are they using it? How much of it is used for work trips? How much of it is used for social trips by people that live here? I mean, that's the real key metric. We know the tourists will use it. We know that people who come in and go to a game would use it, or maybe park in Ybor City and take it into downtown. But I think if you really want to look at it as a value, as a mobility option, is it serving a local population, and what is that dynamic?
Interesting. It seems very viable to me. I know plenty of people that live downtown that use it. We're very close to downtown from our studio. We've walked over the bridge and taken it to go to lunch. I know people that live in Water Street and have an office in Ybor that use it. People that live in Channelside take it to the arena. I think it is viable. And if there was a way to have a fare, a nominal fare, potentially a fare for downtown residents versus a pay per ride fare. That way you get the tourist to pay a little bit more of a share of it. To me, it's the solution for the urban core. I think you connect it. I think you go up to Tampa Heights. I think you go east, you connect it back to Ybor City. You go north of the highway, connect it over to J.C. Newman so people can take tours of that cigar factory. I think it's a viable solution for the urban core. Certainly doesn't solve a regional transportation problem, right? Doesn't solve commuter getting from Brandon to St. Pete, vice versa. Doesn't do any help towards an evacuation plan of any sort, which I know interstates are a big part of. That's why they build these huge road projects, is to get people out during storms. But I do think it's a piece of the pie. I really do.
And it has a big, as downtown grows, as we've all experienced, the cost of parking has really skyrocketed. So that even if you're living in downtown, if you were to have to get in your car, drive 6 or 7 blocks up, or go to Ybor City, you're a resident in Tampa, now you have to go pay for parking and absorb that cost. Where today you can just take the streetcar and bypass all that. It becomes a real benefit for you then.
Right. And I think also at kind of a base level, like you mentioned, when you travel to a city that has an amenity like a metro, right? Metro rail, it's kind of cool. I mean, you're more connected to the city in that way. You're out and about, you're talking to people, you're walking around the streets. I think it would do good for our city to be connected in that manner. So I think beyond everything, it would kind of be a cultural thing we could add in. But I do want to move on. Let's move back to kind of where we left off in your planning career. I want to keep that trajectory. That was a really interesting conversation. Moving in through the 90s, there was kind of a dead area. There was a recession nationally, right? Office towers stopped being built in Tampa. Then my grandfather, I think, was elected in 94. 94, 95. And you were still at the city at that time.
Right.
So what did the 90s look like in Tampa? I remember it being kind of a dangerous, tore up place.
There was a lot of, first of all, my role changed. In retrospect, my role changed with every administration. And that's not uncommon with certain departments with the cities, that a new administration comes in, they have a different set of priorities. There's reorganization goes on.
Yeah.
So under Friedman, I was primarily urban design, downtown planning. When Dick came in, a lot of those functions went into the economic development department. And I migrated to more long-range comprehensive planning at the time, and a lot of special projects helping out the mayors, other administrators. At that time, New Tampa was really starting to explode. Tampa Palms was had just really started to get off, and when I came down, 1987, 88. So Tampa Palms was starting to build out, or at least its entitlements were taken care of. But New Tampa was on the horizon, and the growth of the city was pretty stagnant for the years prior. When you looked at the census statistics, the actual, we called it the old city, the city that was south of Fowler Avenue, had lost population in a 10-year period. And from a growing tax base situation, the way that the city was going to grow was going to have to expand. And so the Tampa Palms and New Tampa became really a big emphasis in trying to annex and foster redevelopment. So there was a lot of effort at the time in trying to work with the developers, annex, work with the state in amending the comp plan. So a lot of my time was working with the state and amending the comp plan, because on one aspect, that was in the county's urban service area, but it wasn't part of the city. So we had to justify to the state that we weren't promoting urban sprawl. We were just changing the going from the county to the city. So it took a lot of, at the time, the state was very, I don't want to say difficult, but there was a lot of regulation from the state that local communities had to negotiate on certain issues. So
If you had not gotten that done, if that was unable to be incorporated, that sounds like it would have been difficult for the city to keep up. If you're losing population, you kind of, Tampa Palms had a high tax base at that time and still does, obviously. A lot of, Hunters Green, all those communities built in the late 90s, early 2000s, tons of economic output and almost none in the southern area,
Right.
really. Could the city have survived without that annexation?
It would have figured out. I mean, it would have been some cuts and
Yeah.
things like that, changes in levels of service. But it provided an opportunity to capture the growth. The city, our stormwater and our water service areas were already in that area. We provide services to an area larger than the city of Tampa. So that was one of the arguments was that we're already prepared to provide water and service to the area. They should be part of the city, not just pay for the connection fees and so forth. So we were able to show that the city was prepared to serve the area. We should also be able to use the tax revenue to help pay for that expansion.
So it wasn't just because my grandfather moved up there. That's what a lot of people say. They're like, yeah, he moved up there, so he wanted it to be a part of the city of Tampa. No. Those other reasons for
Yeah,
it.
there was.
Okay, cool. Interesting. So a lot of your focus at that time was getting that incorporated, getting some sort of a plan together for all those communities. Obviously, that's a different level of development. There's wetlands and green spaces. And as a city planner at the city of Tampa, you had probably never worked on that type of suburban style development before that, correct?
Yeah, I hadn't. I didn't really need to. I wasn't really working at that level. I was working at the state comprehensive plan level, and it was really about, making sure. Again, the state had these rules and requirements about growth and managing growth and levels of service. We had to just sort of go through the, dotting our I's, making sure we had the right information to show that we could accommodate the growth that was planned and that we had the services in place, or the private developer was going to pay for those. And there were a couple of big developer agreements that the developers were committed to providing the infrastructure.
And so largely by planners, downtown and the urban core took a little bit of a back seat during that time, during those first maybe 5, 6, 8 years moving into the early 2000s and mid 2000s.
Yeah, downtown, I think, kind of was on its own trajectory, and it was kind of slow.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but Dick really had a focus on Ybor City when he took office. And that's where a lot of the Ybor City redevelopment occurred during his first term, with a lot of the bars, first of all, coming in, and then you saw a number of residential developments happening above the restaurants and the bars, and then some of the apartment complexes that started to redevelop around Ybor City. So Ybor City really took sort of had that initial wave of the urban core renaissance.
Yeah, because at that time, right, I think 2001, the administration pushed to have that streetcar put in. I believe also HCC's campus was put into Ybor City. I think the city put in a few parking garages at that time.
Right.
There definitely was that city push to get Ybor kind of up and running again. I think also too, Aquarium was before that, but that was right around where that Marriott was constructed, the Marriott Waterside across from the convention center. Yeah. That was pivotal for downtown to have that new hotel come in there. I don't know if you know this story. You probably do. And please pick it up if you do, because you probably know it better than I do. But my grandfather told me that in order to get Marriott, I think it's called Marriott Water Street now, right? There's the JW. Right. I'm talking about the other one. He told me that in order to get Marriott down there, they needed some sort of a tax incentive. And in order to get that tax incentive, he figured out, and the administration figured out, some sort of a structure where that lobby would be a art gallery. And because it was an art gallery, it had some sort of a different tax implication. And that was enough incentive to get Marriott to put a hotel right there. Do you know that story?
I know a version of the story.
I might be completely off.
Yeah, I think it's close. We had requirements, and this was part of the older, the plan that was put in place in 85 or 86, 88, the requirements of public art. And then there was also requirements for public space. And it was difficult, my recollection was it was difficult for the Marriott Waterside to meet the requirements of paying for the public art, paying for the public space, or finding the public space and the landscaping and making their plan work. And so I think that's where it evolved from is let's call the lobby a public space where there is artwork there and they can go across to the Riverwalk. So it met the intent of the ordinance, where people were able to get in, look at the art and the public space, and not have to go out and do something separate and create a piece of art outside and create an atrium outside or a plaza outside. So I think that was one of the things that helped it, was to be creative in the terms of what were we really trying to seek with the requirements of the public space, public art, and landscaping requirements, and allow a developer to provide his building within that framework.
That's great that got done. I remember at that time it was a huge investment. I mean, that was probably the largest hotel in the city of Tampa's history. Yeah, and to have it right there on the water next to the convention center, kind of pivotal, really.
Yeah, and that atrium turned out to be a really nice atrium.
It's beautiful. It's amazing.
And if you think what the alternative would have been, I mean, and this is where sometimes the regulations that we as planners conceptualize, come up against the reality of it. That right next to the hotel, there's a 10-acre park, I think, or an 8-acre park. And we would have required them to put a public space outside someplace and with some art in it. And exactly what that would have looked like and how that would have functioned within the whole area would probably not be as preferred as what's there now.
Right, yeah. And then moving east, where that Channelside development was, if some old Tampa people will remember this, we've talked about it on the show before. There was a movie theater up there, Stump Supper Club. It's where the current Sparkman Wharf site is today. Was that not supposed to be the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino? I heard something about that. Jeb Bush at the time nixed that, and then it went out towards the fairgrounds.
I don't know. I never heard that.
No?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Maybe
not
my
as-
dad's just telling me crazy stories. Yeah, he said something like that, and I thought, boy, man, had that been the Hard Rock, wow, what a catalyst that would have been. Probably could have came with other issues, though. That's kind of a busy, car-centric, kind of wild place. And of course, Sparkman Wharf is fantastic today. But at that time, when now we're moving into like the mid 2000s, when that Channelside development was built, it was a huge project, and it was kind of exciting at the time. I remember we were on Harbor Island to have that development there. We had a movie theater. You know, you had all these different restaurants. There was like, am I remembering a Victoria's Secret there? Or maybe I'm thinking of Central Ybor, the Victoria's Secret was at. But there was some cool stuff going on. So moving past that annexation and getting into the mid 2000s, right before the recession, downtown started to shape back up again. Sky Point Element was built. You got this Marriott we're talking about, Channelside development. I think that's when Port Tampa at the time had built those parking garages. Life was starting to occur, kind of 2005, 6, 7. What was that time like?
I mean, we saw the momentum, I think, in the city, and I think we saw also redevelopment starting to occur in other parts of the city. So we were on an upswing. 2000, and at that time it was the Iorio administration, I believe, and I remember her strategic plan. Under her administration, I was much more involved in strategic planning rather than the physical development planning. I was also involved in strategic planning in Dick's administration. He put together, he doesn't get enough credit for it, but he put together a pretty all-encompassing strategic plan for the city. And then when Iorio came in, my role in that area continued. But I remember one of her areas was residential development in downtown. And they had set a goal that they wanted to see 2,000 residential units happen in, I think, 4 years or whatever. And we were at one of the reporting meetings, the internal reporting meetings, and some of us were a little skeptical of how are we going to get 2,000 units. And at the time, the director of which was the economic development department at the time, Bob Harrell, he said we've already got more than that in requests and people coming in with proposals. So that early 2000 showed how much was happening. People were starting to think about development. And so people got really excited as some of the stuff started to materialize. And then, of course, 2008 hit with the recession and a lot of stuff that was just like putting the brakes on everything.
And Iorio was mayor from what, like 03
to 11, I believe.
Right before Buckhorn, right? And then we can talk about the Buckhorn administration. But Iorio, did she kind of kick off the real Riverwalk as we know it today? Was that under her?
She had, she had what that was one of her commitments, was to really focus on the Riverwalk. She elevated a gentleman, Lee Hoffman, who was in our strategic planning area, because he was really good at working with people and getting things done. She made him the Riverwalk manager and just said, your job is to get this thing done. And he went out and was able to work with the property owners, work with other organizations, develop a plan, and really start pushing things forward. And I'm not sure, but I think he was the one that put together the first grant that was under the Kennedy Street portion, that he was able to get that submitted.
And at this point, we're 20 years into your career at the city of Tampa.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in the late 80s, you guys were talking about putting in those pieces to one day have a Riverwalk. So in your head at the time, 20 years in, are you guys getting excited about, wow, finally we might have a real Riverwalk here?
Yeah, part of it's optimism, like this is really happening. Then it's still like there's still other chunks that are, how are we going to get the rest of it done, sort of thought process.
Wow. So then the recession hits, right? You have this incredible momentum that has really not seen in downtown since you came to Tampa. It's been about 20
Mhm.
years since that momentum has occurred. You have the recession, there's a Trump Tower, there's all this fun stuff going on. All of it falls flat. Iorio finishes out her term, her term, and then Buckhorn gets elected. And I think 11 or 12. Does that sound right?
I think 11.
Nine,
I
eight,
think, yeah, I think it was
eight,
the,
11. Yeah,
yeah.
because Castor was 19, right? So Buckhorn gets in, and he is. I see him as like a cheerleader,
Hmm.
for Tampa, right? He really has. He seems like a man with a big vision for the city. Certainly an urbanist, certainly one that's focused on downtown. So now you're in. How many mayors is this for you? Is this your fourth
Yeah.
administration?
Hmm.
So you, at that point, you kind of have seen, a few different directives coming into play. When Buckhorn was elected and came in, what was his ambition and how did that line up with what you were working on initially?
Uh, well, I knew Bob for when he started with the Friedman administration.
He was
So,
on council, right?
well, he started as Sandy's special legislative liaison. So he did a lot of special projects. He oversaw the McDill base realignment
Thank you for
committee.
bringing that up. Oh my
So
gosh, we have to talk about that.
So that was his one of his big achievements, is making sure that the base stayed here and working with everything at the local and the legislative levels at the national. So when he came in, and then he was on city council, so I worked with him on city council. So when he took office, we'd already had a familiarity and a level of trust. So and I immediately found a role in Bob's administration, primarily the year prior, under the I guess it was the Obama administration. They had a federal grant program that tried to promote sustainable development in local communities. So they had a massive grant program. So I wrote a grant about doing a plan for the downtown area. Primarily, it was about the high-speed rail station because we thought we were going to have high-speed rail. But we got awarded $1 million in planning grants from the federal government. When we didn't get the rail, when that was canceled, we went back to HUD. At that time, Bob had already taken office, and he said his idea was he wanted to look at a much larger area of downtown, not just the central business district, but he wanted to look at West Tampa, the Channel District, and the Tampa Heights. He said he saw this as being one whole area of downtown, not one area surrounded by a bunch of individual areas. And so we pitched HUD saying, look, we have this other idea, rather than, we don't want to lose the money, but we want to reprogram it to this area, which they agreed. So when he took office, we were ready to go with a plan to help him achieve his vision. And what he wanted, his directions to us were, all I want is a blueprint to revitalize the downtown area. Just tell me what I need to do. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about all the details. Just tell me what we need to do, and I'll figure out all the other stuff.
Was that music to your ears at that point?
Yeah, it was. It was nice to be able to, the project really became a really interesting project. He was also in the early meetings when you talked about being a cheerleader, and I've shared this with him a couple of times. His strength of conviction at that time really was pretty amazing. Because I remember we went to a couple of meetings. We were introducing what this planning grant was going to do and how people were going to get involved. So we had a couple of meetings with local organizations, and he would get up, and this is right in the middle of the 2011 when everything was really bad because of the recession, and he would talk about Tampa being this city on, the shining city on the hill, all the opportunity, the place where our kids are going to stay and people from other cities are going to come here. And he would go on, and I would look around the crowd, and they would just have these blank stares, and he said, I don't even know what this guy's talking about. But he was able to see through where we were and say, this is where we're going. And that sort of carried through the plan. It made doing the plan easier because we all knew that our job was to come up with really great ideas and not be limited by any negatives, just make it work.
Isn't that how planning should be? I mean, in a perfect world, shouldn't you start with an extreme ambition about what you're doing and this big thinking and, yeah, don't worry about that money. Don't worry about where you're going to get the funding. Don't worry about
Hmm.
feasibility necessarily. Keep it in mind, right? But shouldn't planning be as aggressive as possible? You can dial it down later.
Yeah, I think you want to be able to show what the potential and possibilities are. Um, the fiscal constraints will show up, the legal
Right.
constraints, the neighborhood constraints will all start sort of making you meander a little bit. But unless you have something, a vision for people to chime in on, then you're not gonna, you can't build it incrementally. You just got to go for it and just see what the response is.
And that directive by the Buckhorn administration became Envision Tampa,
Yes.
correct?
Hmm.
And so David's taking a couple photos right now, but when you're finished up, David, can you pull up that picture I sent you? This picture is a rendering of a very ambitious plan for downtown. It includes the removal of the Selman into what is almost a boulevard. It also includes a ballpark in downtown Tampa, directly north of where the arena sits today. And it's a bold plan. It was maybe in no way, again, right, considered feasible, but was certainly put up there to spark some imagination and probably show from the company that built that, hey, we're ready to be bold, right, and kind of
Hmm.
match the directive of the mayor. Um, so explain kind of how this rendering came about. Was this at the point when you were selecting a company to put this thing together for you guys?
Yeah, we put out an RFP for RFQ, excuse me, for qualified design firms, and in the RFQ, we said a number of things that we were going to be looking for. We were looking for teams that were going to be bold, creative, not afraid to come up with ideas that were not the norm. So I think there were 5 teams that we ended up requesting presentations. And this was one of the teams. This was actually on their brochure and their leading slide for their presentation. And it was basically their way of saying, look, we can come up with bold ideas. And it wasn't just something out of just a bunch of sketches to it. I mean, their idea of removing the Salmon and putting a big, broad boulevard may not be feasible, but what it showed was they understood that downtown should be pedestrian oriented, that there should be ways to get around and build around the public spaces. The ballpark, they put that in. We stayed away. We deliberately stayed away from the ballpark discussion in Invision Tampa because we knew it was so far down the road at that time, and that it would dominate the whole discussion on downtown. We would have never gotten a plan for downtown if everybody was focused on a ballpark. So they put it in there. Everybody just kind of acknowledged that it was in the image, but again, they said, they're kind of challenged us tacitly was that we're not afraid to talk about big ideas, even if they're controversial. It's up to the local community to make the decision, but from the consulting team, we're going to give you the best ideas that we think we could bring.
And how was this received? I mean, obviously Buckhorn probably loved it, and the administration that was following his shining city on the hill probably, enjoyed that perspective. But you also mentioned that a lot of people at that time didn't couldn't see the vision as clearly. So, what was the reception to this Envision Tampa plan?
In the beginning, it was. I mean, first of all, this image really didn't have much weight,
Right.
other than the fact for us, it showed that they have the ability to move forward.
Maybe David pull up the actual Envision Tampa plan because I think it's still on the city's website. If you just type in IN and then vision, all one word, Envision Tampa, I just found it, I think a few weeks ago after we first got coffee. Yeah, you pulled it up. There we go. Is this the
That's a
correct?
that's the progress report. It's the other one.
Yeah, show Randy on the screen, David. He might be able to direct us. It should still be on the city's website.
You downloaded it. It was that one PDF. There it is.
The Tampa City Center Plan, connecting our neighborhoods and our river for the future. So this, after these different consultants come to you and present these different bold ideas, you eventually select one,
Mm-hmm.
then you get working on this plan, and the implementation of the plan is right here in front of us. This is it when it was finished, correct?
Right.
Got it. And so we're talking 2012, 13.
It finished, I think, around 2012. So
2000.
maybe 2013.
Got it. So scroll down, David. So we've got a map of where the city center is. Now this is an interesting one right here because it describes what you said the Buckhorn administration wanted to view our urban core as, which is not just the central business district, but parts of Tampa Heights, West Tampa, what we call North Hyde Park today, traditional downtown Channelside, and Ybor City is all included in this city center. That to me seems like a really smart way to think about this. And you mentioned that really wasn't on the table in your first 20 years at the city. The city, right, was always thought of the central business district. Was this the first time, and I'm sure there was other conversations, right? But was this the first time that a more broad perspective was looked at for our urban core?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, may have been some other times to look at things a little bit broader, but this is, I think, the first time that it was an attempt to really broaden the relationships.
And so from this Envision Tampa, what are what was the findings and the key points and the pivotal moments in this plan that have shaped Tampa today? Because a lot's happened in the last 15 years.
Yeah. One thing I will say is that before we actually kicked off this planning effort, one thing that Bob did, which was really positive, he wanted to have a ULI, I forget what they call it, ULI charrette come in with the Urban Land Institute. They make available experts that come in, and they'll spend a week. You give them, you show them the area of the tour, you give them all the issues. They'll meet with 40 or 50 leaders in the area, different perspectives. And then at the end of it, they'll come back and write a plan saying, this is what you're required, this is what you should do. We asked them to come in for the Invision Tampa area and give us their initial perspective. And what that does, ULI is really the private developer arm of the planning development equation. So a lot of developers have respect for ULI products, and when they come in and do a charrette, because they understand the private side of the development equation. So when they came in, their plan was produced, and it outlined a lot of key aspects of the redevelopment of downtown. And it kind of set the tone for the work plan for the Envision Tampa. ULI wasn't able to get into the actual details, but they talked about the Riverwalk, Julian B. Lane Park. Downtown is having all these growing with a variety of different types of uses. So that was completed, and it really brought a lot of focus. We got a lot of extra interest in the Envision Tampa plan because that effort preceded it. And we got a lot of people from the private development community really interested in what we were doing. When we kicked this off, we kicked it off by having a variety of different meetings in all the neighborhoods. The consultant team was really creative. They had walking neighborhood charrettes. They went out to each of I think there were 8 charrettes where they went out. These are some of the images. In each of the neighborhoods, I met with the residents, and we'd spend a day out walking with them, getting their feedback directly, and then having a charrette. These are all the sort of comments that we received during the process, and they showed how their specific comments came in and fell in different themes of redevelopment. But I think the key things that came out was their philosophy, because the redevelopment of downtown, they said, has so many different things you could do. And what they said or recommended was there were 10 key things that if we could make significant progress on these 10 key areas, that pretty much everything else would start to fall in place. So these were things like the building the Riverwalk all the way around and making connections and streetscape connections, the redevelopment of the West River area, downtown as a really multifaceted work play place, thinking about a medical district, the connections of our medical facilities and the USF and University of Tampa. So they came out with, I think, about 174 specific recommendations. And one of the plans was the monitoring report. I think it showed that like 70%, by the time I left, 70% were either finished or into progress and
Wow.
moving forward on it.
And a lot of those points, and go back up one page, David. Those specific 170 something points. Is that what I'm looking at here?
Those are all
just neighborhood feedback.
This is neighborhood feedback.
Yeah, interesting that most of the things on there are still true today. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. This was probably 15 years ago, but just a few of them extend and expand the streetcar, put the Riverwalk on the west side of the river. You've got, some of these streets are hard to cross. Kennedy's hard to cross. Diversity of housing. Streetcar doesn't serve locals. Not much reward to ride the bus. Convert one way. I mean, there's so much in here is being worked on today, right? Need future regional transit that goes to USF Airport, West Shore, St. Pete. I mean, that was something that you told me on this show, you talked about in the late 80s when you first got to Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
Like these same conversations have been in the air for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me.
So what the plan was able to do, I think what Bob wanted, this gave him his blueprint. And once it was finished, he didn't waste any time in getting his plan out to people that had a development interest in Tampa. I mean, he would send it to developers around the country when he was at conferences. That was sort of his pitch book. And when people came into downtown, he had his whiteboard of projects in his office that were ongoing, and he would talk about the Invision plan, and he would say, "This is where the city is going." And the idea and the message was, "This is where we're going. We'd like you to be a part of it." And people started seeing how they could fit in, and a lot of the stuff that started to happen even after he left office were set because developers began to understand what the expectation was in Tampa, and they started to come forward with projects that I think fit in line with the concepts of the Invision plan and that we're starting to see come out of the ground today.
And then you have the conversations with Water Street at that time too, right? 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, I wasn't directly involved with the current, initially a little bit in the beginning with SBP. My conversations were with the group before that, when they had just purchased the Lightning and had some initial plans. They had known early on, even though Vinnick wasn't part of the group, but they had plans that they wanted something bigger than just the arena.
Right.
Then when Jeff Vinnick came on board, of course, those plans grew much larger. At that time, he was the SPP was working with other people in the city, but the Envision plan had become entrenched in the city vernacular by the late the late teens, and it was part of the budgeting process. It was part of the reporting process. The mayor always was looking for projects that were going to support the Invision Tampa. So I think people just sort of naturally began sort of looking at it as a guide for the future.
How important is it from these large developers, Water Street, but the other ones you're probably referring to when you talk about that relationship between the city and the large developers? Mm-hmm. How important is it for large scale developers to have a plan like this ahead of them so that there is some sort of a guideline and an expectation from the city versus not having something like this on the table for them to look at?
I think it helps them, and you with your background in real estate, you probably would have some insights on it. But I would think that if I was a developer and someone gave me that plan saying this is where the city wants to go, the more that I can align my project to fit those principles, then I would anticipate it being a much easier time to getting approvals
For
and
sure.
moving forward. So,
Well, I only have my small perspective as an investor, and I do want to talk to you. I have a property under contract. I don't know if I want to say it on the show, although this would come out after I close or not. But I only have a perspective from, like a mom and pop type shop, right? Whereas, when you talk about the West River redevelopment with Related and the Tampa Housing Authority, you have a Publix going in, you have federal dollar, like it's such a huge project. I would imagine that can't be accomplished without that puzzle piece being fit into a larger comprehensive plan. Can we
yeah.
talk about, you know what, before we move on, because I don't want to forget this, we talked over the phone about this. McDill Air Force Base. So when Buckhorn first became mayor, 2010-11, right? This whole era, right? There was a plan or a potential plan that was drawn out, which answered the question, what if we no longer had a McDill Air Force Base? And we have, how many acres is it? 1,000.
Yeah, that was in 2000 when he was in the late, maybe early 90s. It was when he was special assistant to Friedman.
So this was not 15 years ago. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. So explain that story to me, because that's fascinating. So at one time, Central Command was going to leave Tampa?
Well, it was on the list. Periodically, it hasn't happened in a while, but periodically the federal government is charged at looking at their inventory of bases around the country and to identify those which may no longer be consistent with the mission that they were established. And I believe McDill was on the list to be possibly closed because the fighter group that was here for many, many years was no longer here. And so that's what made them vulnerable. So there was a committee put up to preserve the base, but there was also a requirement that said, in case it closed, what are we going to do? And so there was another planning effort. Both of these were overseen by Bob. His part of it was working diligently to keep it open. Another was, well, if it closes, we need to have a plan for this. You just can't let all this land just sit there. And so there was, I think, about 5 or 6 committees. There was an economic development committee, a land use committee, social committee, because some federal requirements allow nonprofit organizations sort of first dibs on certain types of assets down there. So we went through this process. I think it took about 8 months, maybe, doing all the information of trying to determine what could be some of the alternative uses for McDill Air Force Base had it closed.
I mean, was Bayshore and Dale Mabry, McDill, West Shore roads all extended down that way? And what was the thought about what it would look like? Would it just be an extension of South Tampa?
Well, I mean, on the surface, that's what most people think it would be. But it becomes very difficult to implement because it doesn't have the infrastructure from the city to be able to support it, like water mains, sewerage mains. A lot of the stuff that's there is at the time was maintained by McDill and it was just fine for the whatever 8,000 or 9,000 people that lived there at that time. So when we started, when people look at it, you think all that acreage could be used as an expansion of South Tampa, and it would be a great place to live. Only parts of it could be really habitable. You got a gigantic runway that's 2 miles long and I think 4 to 5 feet thick.
Good luck ripping that out.
Yeah, and then you've got areas where munitions were stored. You've got oil spills. A lot of it is just contaminated. So it was interesting that the recommendation for the reuse of the facility was that we looked at all the different types of uses, and the only thing that we could come up that would be a reasonable use would be an airfield, because living there would be too expensive, plus all the environmental stuff. So on one hand, it looked like it was a plum, and we realized that it was going to be a real difficult transition. Luckily, That's when the tankers were moved from, I think, Kansas to McDill right about that same time. So it gave McDill a new mission and allowed them to keep their base open. CENTCOM, SOCOM were strengthened in the area. So now it's hopefully off the list for some time.
I would imagine so. Plus, right around that time, right, 9/11 happens. You've got this massive effort in the Middle East, which is, that's CENTCOM is their headquarters. That's their area of operations. So I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
How interesting, though, that was all looked at. Wow. So in airfield, I mean, did those thoughts and plans extend further? I mean, what would that look like? Like a city-owned airfield of some sort?
We never got further than the recommendation. That's what it could be.
But when you're, in the shower at night thinking about it, what's in your head? What was your ambition? I mean, what were you thinking about?
I think we were hoping that the DOD would look at that and say, well, it's an airfield now. Let's just keep it the way it is. I mean, we went through all the alternative strategies, and sometimes certain planning exercises, you just have to go through all the strategies and alternatives, and then that's all they wanted was an alternative strategy, and we gave it to them, and it happened to be the same strategy it is today.
So back to kind of moving towards the second Buckhorn administration, his second term. Water Street pieces are getting in place. You've got the Invision Tampa plan, and the construction of Water Street, I think, started in 2016 or 17. But you mentioned you weren't necessarily working on that closely.
Yeah, once they started coming, working into the actual development plan, they were moving more into the economic and technical people at the city.
But your efforts at that time were probably focused on West River, West Tampa.
Yeah, I started transitioning into the West River redevelopment plan at that time.
So this is the West River plan is probably the largest real estate development project in the city's history, right? In terms of the size and the acreage of it, it's a huge area.
Yeah, and it's primarily I forget the actual acreage, but it's the Tampa Housing Authority who owns most of it, and I think the city had about 23 acres, maybe 30 acres of it. So we joined forces with the Tampa Housing Authority. Was going to redevelop North Boulevard Homes and the Mary Bethune Towers. That was in their work plan. So at that time, Mayor Buckhorn brought the city land into it. We also had agreements with the county because they own about 6 acres in there that they would be part of the redevelopment plan. And I thought there was one other partner, the school district. School district, we were working to try to develop some strategies to open up the riverfront and get them a new school.
So I would assume Urban Core Holdings and Rome Holdings are private entities.
Yeah.
So you've got about 12 acres of private. And then you've got Hillsborough County School Board, City, and Tampa Housing Authority with the remaining ownership. Zoom out a little bit, David. So here's the ownership perspective of this area. Obviously a huge opportunity for affordable housing and a lot of other exciting things that was much needed in the city. And now you have federal grants that could potentially take care of a West Riverwalk expansion, which is really exciting. And now if you go there, there's a huge development project going on. They're already topped out on a few of these different buildings. I think they've already converted the one building you mentioned and renovated it.
Yeah, Mary's Bethune.
There's a Publix going up. I wanted to ask you specifically about that Publix. And let me say before we talk about the Publix, Julian B. Lane Park is also a part of this too, right? The funding for that was the BP oil spill money. That was like a $35 million park, super popular. People love it. We hosted the Super Bowl events there. I mean, definitely an awesome asset to the city. So right north of that, you have Interstate 275. On the other side of 275 is this West River development, including this Publix. This Publix has there's Main Street and Boulevard is that intersection right there. On Main Street and Boulevard is concrete walls, and that Publix is built like you would see out in Riverview or a suburban area where you have that parking lot in the front and the Publix entrance in the front facing the parking lot. And the Publix is not open to the park or on Boulevard to the Main Street. Explain that to me. Is that Publix saying, hey, we have a way we kind of build, we have a model of how we like our stores run? Because it seems like from a city planning perspective, given the context of everything we've talked about on the show today, the Envision Tampa plan, the walkability, the connectivity, it seems like that Publix design goes against that. So can you explain like how that kind of came about?
I wasn't. I had left before the time that the Publix had developed a site plan, so I don't know what their thinking was or who was involved in it. But just my experience on it is usually they have a concept for. A developer has a concept. His architects have a concept about the way things are going to work and how their store is going to orient, where their front door is, where their service is. And there may have been, whether or not there were some discussions about how it should fit into the overall fabric. There may or may not have been those discussions.
Sure.
You're in the middle of different transitions of people at that time.
Right.
So, some of the Invision Tampa purists may not have been there at that time.
Right.
So you just don't know, at least I don't know what all the thought process was, and were they able to work around different scenarios, or was that what they wanted to do right from the beginning?
Interesting. Yeah, just because it seems short-sighted to build it that way, in my opinion. Having two concrete walls on Main and Boulevard doesn't seem like it lines up with this cohesive vision that many people in the city talk about. Mm-hmm. But I also understand from Publix's business perspective, they have a model of how they build those stores out. And if they're going to put a Publix in a certain location, it's got to fit within that model because they know what works. And as a business, I don't think I've seen Publix have a different way that they build those stores out. You certainly have the Water Street Publix that's built out towards the street. The Channel Side one is similar. You've got a few concrete walls and then an entrance on, I think it's, what street is that? Is that Twigs? The street that crosses Meridian right there.
Yeah, I think it is Twigs.
Twigs. I just wanted to see if you had any insight. So you actually were not there when all that deal was done.
Yeah, correct.
Interesting. But what I do really appreciate is the vision for it, and I think it's a fantastic location to have some workforce housing and affordable housing, and that's what that's made to accomplish.
Yeah, and it increased the amount. There was approximately 1,100 public housing and senior housing initially, and my understanding is after it's completed, there'll be about 1,800. It won't be public, but it'll be income assisted based on their range.
It's fantastic. It's a great location for people to access the urban core and other parts of the city. It's such a good location to do a development like that. It's interesting in all of these different areas that have been developed and everything we've talked about today, how much opportunity there was in and around the urban core to do things like this because of the availability of land, because of the empty parking lots and the urban blight and after the highways were put in, some of those areas and some of those neighborhoods never recovered until now. I mean, there hasn't been development in this West River area in probably both of our lifetime in a long time, So it's exciting to see things happen. I mean, you're right over the bridge to Armature Works, some of the exciting things happening in Tampa Heights. It's cool that there's life injected into not only downtown now, but all of these little ancillary neighborhoods around the urban core.
Yeah, it is.
It's cool to see. So at this point, you're kind of on your way out the door, been with the city 35 years, and now you're retired from the city. Do you still do any sort of consulting work and planning?
I don't do any consulting work. When I left, I was ready to go.
Yeah.
I still like the problem solving. I find myself periodically I'll read an article in a newspaper and my mind will already start thinking about, next steps, how to handle it. But I really don't like. I'm really done with the politics stuff and all the things that you have to meander to be able to get to a solution. But I still keep touch with some of my planning colleagues that are still working and sort of touch base on what's going on. The one thing I do that's probably, it's only my personal goal, was I always wanted to create a 3D database of development in Tampa, and to be able to, the technology was there. We can never get the funding or get the right staff to actually could geocode and link all the databases together. So in my spare time, that's usually what I'm working on, is trying to recreate a 3D database of the development. Basically shows what's existing, what's planned, what's proposed, using ArcGIS and City City Engine as the 3D modeling program.
Do you have anything to share? I mean, do you have a website ready to go with this?
I think I had on LinkedIn, there might be an old post that has where it was maybe about 8 months ago.
Mr. Deco, pull that up for me. Let's see what we got. Very interesting. So kind of a sort of passion project. You've I'd imagine you've wanted to get that done since you started at the city. Has there ever been anything like that at a city level?
In other cities, there are.
In other cities.
But what makes it a little bit, we used to do, when I was earlier in our planning divisions, we used to publish something called a Major New Development Report. And it was a report that had, it wouldn't be on my website, I don't think. Be the LinkedIn.
Where were you in that picture? Do you do a lot of traveling?
Yeah, I do. That's my other
hobby?
Right.
That'll be the next podcast. The hobbies of Randy Goers. Drones, traveling, city of Tampa, 18 years. So this is LinkedIn. I think you'd have to go, David.
You have to go to my posts.
Yeah. You might have to. I don't want to make you join LinkedIn right here on the spot while we're live, but I'll look into that. That sounds really interesting to me. Have you heard of Studio HB?
I have not.
So you see this, I talk about this a lot on the show. I have a halfway comprehensive rendering. This is a couple years old. It's a rendering of the urban core with every proposed, planned, some completed projects. David, you could pull up studiohb.io. They're also on Instagram. People that listen to the show have heard me talk about it a whole lot. I've posted about it. Check this out, Mr. Randy. Look at this. So
cool.
This is kind of what you're describing, right? I'm not sure, David, if you can zoom out, but they've done a great job at piling together developments that are in the urban core. And it can give you this bird's eye view. Now, a lot's missing here, but it gives you this really cool bird's eye view of all the action in downtown, in and around downtown. And you've got the Pendry on here, Gasworks, Water Street. It's missing a ton of stuff. I need to get with them and share some information so that they can update it. But this sounds like exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The only, I would say the functionality that I was able to achieve with, I'm trying to see if I have an image on my phone.
Sure.
But because it's a database, the projects can be sorted, and so I could get a total of the number of housing units that are under constructed, what's planned, how much square foot of retail is on the drawing board, all that kind of stuff.
I think this is so helpful from a national perspective when different corporations, different companies, and even smaller businesses looking to have a footprint in our city. If they can see what's to come, if they can see a growth trajectory, that's very helpful in their due diligence on picking a city to move their business to. I think the city should fund some sort of a comprehensive plan within a website that tracks all of these data points. Then you could pitch that to large companies. If Amazon's looking in the area or Google wants to have an office here, or who knows, right? They could look at this and make it an easier decision.
It's also, I've always looked, the value is it's also in being able to, like we know that you've got Water Street, you've got the development that's happening over in Ybor, West River, stuff that's happening in Tampa Heights. But once they're all on a map and sort of showing what the what it's going to look like, you can begin trying to figure out what's going to happen in between. And that's really some of the key things. How do you link these areas together? What's the environment going to look like? Which streets are going to naturally become the pedestrian streets versus the service streets? All that starts to sort of reveal itself when you put it all on a map.
Yeah, that infill is so important. It's great to have a guy like Jeff Vennick come in and spend $1 billion and create this incredible neighborhood, or Daryl Shaw's ambitious plans to develop 80 some acres in the Ybor area. But small developers are important too, and everything in between. And it's not just about these massive skyscrapers. It's about the duplexes, quadplexes, smaller apartment buildings, the commercial properties that get developed. And a lot of that decision making by those smaller developers is kind of on the back of the larger growth trajectory. And if I know, if I look at Ybor and I go, oh my gosh, look at this, this huge developers putting this massive new neighborhood in with different mixed uses, and I'm looking at a site in the area, maybe I'm a little more confident to make that decision and move forward with the project. One project can help another project. That's how a city grows, right? And so I think you're right. I think having this overall look in the minds of developers, big and small, is beneficial for our city as a whole moving forward. We'll have to get together on your website. Maybe I can connect you with these guys. You guys could put your heads together, because this website format I think is great. It's easy to use, but you bring up an interesting point about connecting the dots in the data and having an overall number of units in terms of square footage of commercial space, housing units, etc.
Yes. I'm looking at my other sources to see if I could find the map, but it's just not there.
Pull up, David. Do they have the rendering that's on the wall? I'll airdrop it. We can kind of wrap up the show with this. Thank you for spending a couple hours here, by the way, today, Randy. This has been a really cool show. Diving deep into this history. I think
here's an image of what one of the.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, very, very cool. You put it up on Facebook here in April. Yeah, very cool. And you include a lot of stuff that's not listed on the on this Hot Blocks website. Very, very cool. I'll try to airdrop the one I have to David, unless you can try to do that too. And we can kind of wrap the show up with this. I think people that are, you have to be, I'll use the word nerd, right? I'm a total nerd for the city. I love Tampa. I'm a real estate guy, so obviously partly of my career I'm interested in this stuff, but also just growing up here and seeing the city grow. I love imagining the future of the city and what it could be and tracking all these developments. And I think if you enjoy the show, you probably have a little bit of that nerd in you too. So seeing stuff like this is just, at the end of the day, super cool.
Cool.
Right. David, did you get the airdrop? Pop that thing up, because this is an even really better view of both your website or that picture and then the one we're looking at now. It's a little bit clearer image, and it shows you more of a realistic view, much like the one I have here in the studio with the blue buildings. It's what. So is this a video? Does this pan around?
It shouldn't.
Oh no. Okay. But
can he zoom? Is it able to zoom out?
No, it's just a static video. So this basically only shows some of the channel side developments, and then Ybor Harbor and Gasworks. Wow. It's interesting to think about Tampa in the next few decades when all of this is built. What is that next step, and what is that next phase? We can leave with this question for you. What does Tampa 2050 or 2070 look like? What are we really looking at when you take a look at all these new developments, these massive gasworks and Water Street? What are we really looking at? Are we like the size of Boston? What do you think?
It's hard for me to compare city sizes.
Sure.
But I think we're going to see our downtown area be pretty well developed, we're going to see a lot of infill. A lot of these buildings that are the 1 to 3 stories are going to be replaced by the 15 to 20 stories. So our urban core is going to look like an urban core from many miles away. I think the part that will be interesting is there's a few corridors that have the ability to leave downtown with 6 to 8 story line corridors transitioning down to where they're at today. And I think that's really where some of the development in the downtown area. We're going to see areas, I think the challenge down in the Gandy area, you got a lot of undeveloped or underutilized land that has higher land use category. So challenge is going to be finding the right mix of development to create an asset for the community and not just duplicate development patterns of the past.
Very cool. A lot of exciting stuff. Are you in Tampa to stay? You're going to stay here in your retirement?
Yeah, I just travel a lot, but I live in Tampa.
Cool. Love it. Randy, thanks for being here. I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
It was
If
great.
people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
They can either go to randygoers.com, that's my webpage, or go to the droneradioshow.com webpage.
Drone Radio Show. Check it out, people. Yeah. All right. Randy, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody. Hey, guys, if you want to watch episodes just like this one, make sure to click right here to view the rest of our full episodes. And also make sure to subscribe by clicking right here. Thank you for watching.